Hey guys, welcome. Aussie Craft Distillers shooting the shit, and we're up to episode. What are we up to? Episode? Any idea?
67.
67 or something.
Yeah,
67.
right. Wow.
This is 67. Who'd have thunk we'd go that bloody long?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Anyway, tonight's a little bit different. Tonight we are talking to someone who knows all about yeast and fermentation solutions. So we're talking to Josh from Mogwai Labs. G'day, Josh. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, Crafty. Thanks for having us on tonight.
Oh, mate, no, it's a pleasure. It's a different topic. It's something which is very, very important to brewers, as we know, and also to distillers. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what we learn tonight, what we share. So anyway, before we kick off, we tend to have a wee drink, and we tend to say what we are drinking. So I'll go first because I'm broadcasting from a bedroom at Riverbourne Distillery. I'm kneeling, and I have the laptop set up on the bed. So this is why I look in a very strange position. So I have one glass of whiskey, and it's down here. And it happens to be a Riverbourne whiskey. So it's
Which
latest
one?
Riverbourne Ultimatum.
Oh, right. Lovely.
Called The Challenge. So,
Can't see. No.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Maverick from Iron House down in Tasmania.
Yep.
So the story about this is that it finished its maturation in a barrel sloshing around on a fishing boat called Maverick for, I think, 18 months or something like that. It's not one that I bought when I was down there, but I didn't opt out of something, and now I've got a bottle, which actually I'm enjoying. Thank you, Brad. We appreciate you.
We've all been there, Todd. We've all been there.
what about you, Josh? What are you on?
Right. Well, I had a dig through the cupboard, and I've found two drinks actually. So the first one, my wife, she had a little holiday over to the UK earlier in the year, and around the Scotland area, and I've got a bit of this. I don't know a lot about the distillery, so I don't know if you gents can sort of have more insight.
The Highlands.
It's Lindlords, Lowlands.
Lowlands.
Yeah, it's a lowland. Yeah.
Right. I'll have to look that
not,
one up.
Not all that common, that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's you do see it around the whiskey community, but it's not all that common. So yeah, excellent.
And another drink that I brought along. Sorry.
Yeah.
So this is sort of merging sort of brewing and wine and sort of distilling worlds. So a couple of local breweries in the Illawarra have brewed up this. I'll call it a monster of a drink, to be fair. So it's an imperial stout called Nightingale by Principal Brewing in collaboration with Barrel Shepherd in Wollongong, where the beer was an imperial stout was made, but then they sort of took it further and got bourbon staves soaked. Barrel staves soaked in bourbon, put into the beer for about a week or so, and then further age the beer in French oak for 12 months.
Oh, wow.
So it's, so I'll crack, I don't know, I might need my wife to help me drink that one. 7.1 standard drinks. Yeah.
What's the ABV on it?
Yeah.
Getting up there.
7.1 standard drinks. I can't actually find it. But generally after beer and that is aged in barrels, it normally sort of jumps up 1% or 2 as well.
Yeah,
so.
right.
Mm-hmm. I'd imagine that'd be close to around the sort of 8 to 9%, maybe even higher. Sounds good.
We'll crack it a bit later during the
purely out of coincidence, I'm also drinking the challenge.
Wow, that is a coincidence. You had no idea what I was drinking. I had no
I
idea
had
what you
no idea what you were drinking, and I also happened to be drinking it in my Riverborn glass.
Well, there you
So,
go.
cheers.
I don't think Marty ever gave me a Riverborn glass, so I'm feeling a bit left out.
Yeah.
I'll just have to use my Blackgate one instead.
See, I don't have one of those.
Oh. I used to have
Anyway,
a Kathy drop
Anyway,
one.
let's kick it off. So, Josh, you've got an interesting story. I mean, you've come from a scientific background, then you've gone into commercial brewing. You had your own brewery, didn't you? If I recall right. And then you've gone into what you're doing now with Mogwai Labs. So, tell us a bit about where it all started and why you've ended up where you are now with Mogwai Labs.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, firstly, just a sort of a quick word on the actual business. So, yeah, the business Mogwai Labs, we're a liquid yeast lab based in the Illawarra region of New South Wales. And, we provide liquid yeast pitchers to commercial brewers and other professional beverage makers.
Yeah.
Hoping to sort of move into the homebrew sector potentially in the new year, and then sort of pairing these products with quality control services. We're based out of the University of Wollongong. We are a startup business. We've been going since 2020, so probably not a startup phase anymore. Sort of getting into sort of the growth stage, I guess, and then. That's sort of where we're at, and I guess at the moment, we are very brewer yeast heavy, and what we want to do is we want to focus on 100% of the brewing spectrum. So what I mean by that is like having a very diverse range of yeast and bacteria strains, starting with a lot of common domesticated strains that you come across in 90% of your everyday beers, and then sort of moving into classical wild strains, I'll classify them as. So sort of yeast and bacteria that comes out of like sort of classical beer styles, like wild ales from Belgium, for example. Non-conventional strains, so wild strains that are non-Saccharomyces that have potential in the beverage sector, so pitchier, things like that. And then sort of moving into the foraged yeast space, which sort of encompasses wild yeast as well. And that's where we're sort of going out to sort of local areas, foraging, and either doing it independently or working with other beverage makers to see what we can get and sort of create or enable beverage makers the ability to create truly localized products and with a good story. Yeah.
So the local angle, which is a very important part, I imagine craft brewers would be very, very receptive to that.
Look, I mean, like a lot of the brewers like the idea of it. I mean, it's not for everyone as well, either based off their business model. Like some people generally are, they want to get involved with it. And again, it's sort of it's not something that you can sort of knock over in a month's time. It is sort of a ongoing project that sort of takes years to develop.
Right. So, I guess jumping right into it, when you say years to develop, are you talking about I've got a brewery, I want to come up with the flavor of my brewery or the region that I'm from or whatever it may be, based on the yeast of the area? How does it take years to build that profile and sort of evolve the yeast, or is it just?
I mean, years might be a bit of an exaggeration, I guess, but like it's 6 months to 12 months probably to to like go out, isolate some yeast strains, and then either you're going to come back with pure culture or a mixed culture that potentially that you could work with in your brewery setting. And then in terms of like with these sort of projects, it's like you can go as far as you want to go with it in terms of just like further analysis, in terms of like flavor profiles and just learning more about these yeasts by themselves or in culture.
So how do you find out? How do you discover the flavor profile of a yeast? I'm imagining, which is dangerous. I'm imagining that you do small batch brews of a base malt. You throw your single strain yeast that you're trying to analyze, let that ferment, and then have a little bit tasty.
In its simplest sense, that's pretty much it. Like your nose doesn't lie, and either do your taste buds.
You've got to have balls of steel to do that.
You're selective. There's some stuff not to go near. I mean, a lot of the time
you possibly won't try it.
Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff, and like we do have a set of like pre-screening and selection criteria to get the strains to that step. So it's not like we're just like going, like sort of step
going
one
in blind.
and drinking, going in wild and tasting this stuff. So it's got to pass a few sort of critical, like even control points, safety points before it even gets to that step.
How do you determine?
So how do you go about harvesting the yeast when you get out in the field?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of well-known methods. So it's not recreating the wheel by any means. And method one is where you just go out and take a small picking of a bit of fruit, or it can be a bit of bark, a leaf, a flower, dirt, whatever is of interest, in very small amounts, and then you can take that back and then start trying to grow it up in your selection media, or like brewer's wort, essentially. Other methods is where you can go out and take actual swabs, sterile swabs of the material of interest, so less intrusive, where essentially just a sterile cotton bud. And another method that is quite popular is where you actually sort of put out like a selection media or brewer's wort sort of out in a field under a fruit tree, for example, or out in the garden, and then you might cover it with like some thin netting mesh or something just to stop bugs and stuff to go in there, and you leave it overnight, and then the next day you collect that sample and sort of see if it starts fermenting.
So not the way we tried at crafting.
No.
There's probably a whole bunch of other methods though. Like that's just sort of
okay. You're going to have to elaborate on how you tried, because
I don't know. I just tuned up
pretty well done, actually. It was a very small amount of wort in a jar with some mesh over the top, but I left it too long, and what was in there was not attractive, so it didn't get any further than that.
Where did you put the jar? Did you keep it in your caravan?
All over the place.
All over the place. In the shed, outside the shed, by a lemon tree, by a rosemary bush,
right.
all in the general area. And this is going back a couple of years, and it's definitely something. If you're going to do it, you got to do it right, and that's why people like Josh and enlisting people who know exactly what they're doing. It's the way to go. So besides the attraction of cultivating something which is local, what are other reasons that people are doing it in the brewing sector?
Just the drive for the brewing sector, or just our fermented beverage sector period. It's an extremely innovative space where people are just constantly sort of pushing themselves to sort of unlock new flavor combos and new products, styles of beer, for example. I just think innovative. It's sort of it's a creative. It's just being creative.
So it's adding another dimension to that creativity of brewing and hops and different barleys. Does yeast have that big a variety in it?
Yeah, 100%.
More so.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Leading question there, really.
Yeah.
Because there seems to be an infinite number of places to get yeast and strains of yeast that could do something or do nothing. How do you whittle it down to the ones that are good?
From forage samples, do you mean?
Even with your core range there.
Oh, right. Yeah, look.
How did you establish your core range?
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, like yeast and fermentation. So, I mean, it's something that, like humankind that we've been well aware of and practicing for thousands of years. And fermentation in its like sort of basic, in its most basic definition is where you take a simple sugar, you add yeast, and then with energy you end up with ethanol or an alcohol and carbon dioxide. And the beautiful thing with this is like aside from creating those two products, is like it also can produce like over 500 different flavor compounds. And it's all those flavor compounds that have enabled people around the world to sort of create unique styles of beer that are unique to that particular region of the world. And with time, we just keep getting better and better at sort of being able to manipulate through either yeast selection or manipulating or changing our say brewing processes in terms of how to bring out particular flavors that we're looking for in our end product. And yeah, look, there are like over 1,500 different species of yeast, but from a commercial industrial perspective, like we're only using like a really really small percentage of that. So like baker's yeast, brewer's yeast, distiller's yeast, a lot of that is just the same species of yeast. And it shows you how diverse even those species are, because even though they're the same species, the flavor differential between them is absolutely huge. I mean, the prime example of this, I'm going to keep using beer examples, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's good.
But like, a species of yeast that it'll be the same, and you can drink a Belgian ale or a clean Californian ale from the States, even though it's the same species, but you put them side by side, and one's like phenolic and spicy, and the other one it'll be like neutral, and you're just getting like a clean beer.
What's driving the differences with the same species then? Why are they so?
Well, I mean, that's where like evolution and stuff like that, where these species become sort of their own sort of like a subspecies essentially, or a strain. And it's just when they will just end up sort of elevating particular flavor profiles consistently compared to other ones.
Yeah, right.
And then sort of to go back to like where the strain collection sort of comes from, and that it's a lot of the famous breweries or distilleries and that around the world, they have these like unique flavored products or beers or whatever, and a lot of that comes down to that yeast strain. So and all these different strains are like they're classics for a reason, and they're all stored at particular yeast banks and things like that around the world for people to have access to. So I've got good collection of, I guess, like core classical strains for people that want to utilize those strains either to replicate famous styles of beer or to try and innovate with that yeast, knowing that particular flavor profile.
Mm.
Mm.
So
once you've established a yeast strain and you commercialize it, so you're producing it and generation to generation to generation, do you get drift? Does the flavor profile change? And if it does, how, from the parent, so to speak, how do you maintain that point of uniqueness?
Yeah, I mean, like over time, and like, you know, we're talking like over hundreds and hundreds of generations, that flavor profile will definitely slightly start swinging.
Right.
But that's sort of the importance of pure culture and sort of being connected to Yeast Labs. So breweries that are they've got their core range sort of ales and lagers and stuff. They will always, well, it's common practice for them to be consistently using the same pure cultured yeast, and you can guarantee that pure culture by always going back to the source where it's only grown up, you know, only a couple of generations before it goes into their beer or their spirit. So in some breweries will push that further than others, where they will, you know, they'll continue to repitch their yeast up to, you know, like 10, 20 generations, maybe. That's getting excessive. But yeah, and that, but then that sort of passes the buck onto their actual brewing practices and what they're comfortable with in terms of flavor thresholds and that, so for core range beers and things like that, people want to be as consistent as possible, and that's where, you know, keeping their yeast for only a couple of generations is their ideal.
How do you hold a generation? Because to me, yeast is a living, changing thing. It lives, it dies, it replicates, and the cycle goes on. How do you keep it as a consistent base strain?
Yeah, so like
a living creature, so to speak.
Yes, well, sort of like the Austin Powers movies, where, you know, they get frozen down, and they you know, like, say if someone orders some yeast through me, or like, you know, like the first process is to, you know, pull that sample, which is essentially in like a small little tube, like from a really cold -80 freezer, and then it'll go onto like an agar plate, and then you start your propagation steps, and they're always going to be set in stone, essentially, so you know sort of exactly how many generations that you have.
Yeah, right. So somewhere there is an awful lot of stored, banked yeast for all those major core styles that people want to replicate. Like if you run out, you forgot to check the fridge and see how much you've got left in there, and your test tubes run out of your base. You've got to then go to somewhere to get it. Is there a global authority that holds it all, or is it
the Yeast Authority? Yes. No.
Yeah, you know.
No, like, good question. It's no, look, there's a whole bunch of like established biobanks and yeast collections around the world, and you know, some people they do grant you access, or you can, you know, you can pay for those strains because they are public access. Yeah, I mean, I hope that I'm looking after my yeast well enough that there's always going to be enough tubes in the fridge, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that would be my management practices. Would I go all of a sudden open up the fridge and go, oh fuck, I've run out of that one. Eek. Who do I call now?
Yeah.
So how did you decide to open up Mogwai? Like, so you've had a brewery, you've been in and around yeast for a while. How did then Mogwai start? What was the inspiration for that?
Oh, right. How much whiskey do you have to drink?
I have an awful lot of whiskey to drink.
One or two.
Yeah, I mean, like, sort of, even like, sort of post, like, I guess, sort of back from where I grew up is essentially where it all began. Like, so I come from a small little village called Illabo, which is out in the Riverina, southwest slopes, sort of between Junee and Cootamundra. So just envision like a one pub town with like 50 or 70 people there. And my folks owned the pub there when I was growing up from 7 until I guess like my early 20s, I think, off the top of my head. So sort of growing up in that area, sort of the pub is like sort of the heart of the community. Well, it was definitely back then where, like the whole community would sort of come together there for, like, village events, whether it's a local show or the music festival or anything, or, like like the farmers, the working class people, like the mechanics and stuff would all sort of congregate there. So sort of learning from an early age or growing up with it, sort of the power of community and what can be done shared, I guess, like over a beer. Essentially, I saw sort of power and a romantic sort of side to that. Yeah, and then sort of moving on to like, so I went and studied biology at the University of Wollongong, and it was sort of at that point where, like a lot of people do, they start home brewing to make cheap beer, because that's the cheapest way to get drunk and all that sort of stuff. And then it was where I met my now wife, and it was actually interactions with her family that sort of was a real sort of spark plug moment in terms of sort of delving more into a career and sort of obsession, I guess, with beer and other fermented products. So, I mean, up until then, I was only drinking like the 4 taps that were on sale at my local pub where I grew up. Like it was like Melbourne Bitter and Rishi's and stuff like that. But my wife's family, they're English. They sort of moved over to Australia in the early 80s. And when they, like, when you first meet, get to meet, and they see what you're drinking, and they were horrified that I was drinking, like sucking on a VB or whatever the hell it was at the time. And it was that conversation, and then like sort of moving on, sort of going over to the Europe and UK and traveling and sort of experiencing different beers from around the world, and sort of and the flavor profiles and stuff, and sort of realizing there's a lot more to this fermented beverage than just the 4 taps at the local pub where I grew up. And I guess like sort of from there, like my curiosity was like completely sort of taken over, and then the home brewing gets more and more serious, I guess. Been there. As it does, you start spending a lot more money on ingredients, homebrew equipment.
Been there.
And then you find good friends through that community. I started home brewing with a couple of good friends from my best mates from high school, and then that led to sort of starting up a brewing company, a gypsy beer business that we called Merchant Brewing, and that was sort of between I want to say like 2014 to 2018, based around the inner west of Sydney. And sort of at the time then, there was only there was 2 craft breweries in the area, so Young Henry's being one, and then Batch was just opening their doors. I remember driving from the south coast and sort of going along Sydenham Road and going, what is that? And it was a Batch just opening the doors. Going in there was nothing but everything was just made of like a couple of pallets. There was a few tanks in the corner, and so I thought it was absolutely amazing.
Wow, you're part of early history then.
And like just like Young Henry's back. In their early days, they, I guess, like before RSA laws become a little bit more strict, all their local drinkers and that, they had a wall where all their steins and glasses for their locals would have their own sort of signature glass. So when you go in there for a beer, you grab your...
I remember that wall well.
Yeah, so that sort of stuff. yeah, and then just sort of made that sort of move into commercial brewing. With my friends, just through winning a homebrew comp, and then got the ball rolling, and then it was just during that point in time where we were trying to do all these commercial batches at different breweries through Sydney or down the south coast, and trying to replicate homebrew recipes on a commercial scale is one thing that we found out was like a little bit difficult at times, particularly when you're adding extra weird little ingredients like coconut or whatever.
Yeah.
And that also came down to yeast selection, where we realized that it was really hard to get commercial quantities of the yeast or liquid yeast that we wanted to use in that beer. So at the time, all liquid yeast came from overseas, and I guess that was sort of the light bulb moment for me to start thinking about yeast. So I guess, like, as well, I should mention I am a biologist by trade. So while doing the whole brewing thing, I had a research position in a telomere cancer research lab out at Western Sydney for the Children's Medical Research Institute. The fundraising day, Genes for Genes Day, a lot of people are familiar with.
Yep.
And then from there, it was trying to, it was a really nice position that I liked, and difficult decisions of trying to pull up stumps on, the brewing, my day job with research, and sort of chasing this yeast dream, essentially. And that involved me sort of going over to the States and Canada for a period of time and sort of exploring already set up liquid yeast labs. And sort of seeing the viability if I could actually get it to work over here in Australia. And then finally 2020, when COVID ticked over, I decided to get business plan rolling and move back down to the Illawarra and set up shop.
Right. So what is the shop? What's your facility? How does it all work? Where are you doing all of this?
Yeah, so we've got an affiliation with the University of Wollongong. So I've got lab space in one of their research labs. Pardon me, essentially at the university. And that's just where everything happens. And I guess so. Which is great, and want to obviously continue on that sort of that partnership relationship and sort of delve more into research side of things. But then also currently at a fork in the road and working out on how to expand the business and sort of get our own sort of industrial, sort of more of a manufacturing plant sort of set up, still in the Illawarra area, still keeping the lab space at the university, but just so we can sort of significantly sort of increase production and get yeast out to more people.
Yeah, right. So what is the difference between a little dry yeast packet that I can get versus a liquid yeast? What are the benefits of going the liquid route over the dry route?
Yeah, look, I mean, both have like pros and cons, and it really depends on even personal preference and sort of what circumstances that you're in. Liquid yeast has its best the most positive thing with liquid yeast is that you're getting fresher pitches, and then with that. Generally, you are getting a more reliable cell count and things like that. You can argue for like reduced lag time, so for quicker, healthier fermentations, and strain selection is the big one. So, while dried yeast, I don't want to talk for other businesses. I mean, they are getting better with their range and stuff, but it'll always be limited compared to liquid yeast. So, I guess like an example for us is like even though we've got like about 40 strains posted online on our website, we have hundreds stored in our biobank, and probably at any stage it's easy for us to grow up any size possible for anyone if requested.
Right.
And I guess like for dried yeast though, like I won't be completely biased towards liquid and stuff, but like so dried yeast is more shelf stable, so you can sort of like beat it around the bush a bit more. It can last a bit longer, so it won't lose its viability as quickly compared to fresh liquid yeast, which has to be kept cold. And there are benefits to using dried yeast because it normally has like sort of built-in sterol and oxygen, better sterols and oxygen sort of built into it. So if you are going to sort of do the pitch and ditch method, essentially, where you don't have to think about adding particular dosages of oxygen or anything like that, you'll probably have a much easier time with dried yeast compared to liquid.
Right.
But if you then
you can't really just stick it in the post and send it off around the country.
I have been, yeah. There is like express post, and like just a whole bunch of ice packs, and try to go like styrofoam free, and we've got like wool packaging, like recycled wool insulation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we can generally get it around the country anywhere. Like East Coast is generally within 24 hours. To metro areas, and then up to maybe 3 days.
Are there ever any biosecurity concerns of shipping yeasts around the country and around the world?
What's that? Sorry.
Are there any ever biosecurity concerns or issues shipping yeast around the country or around the world?
So that was sort of I guess like one of the reasons for me to sort of start the business, because at the time, like shipping liquid yeast in from the States or into Australia, generally, or it'd be common for that yeast to like get pulled up at customs, and because it is liquid yeast, it would sit there for a period of time, and it wouldn't be as good or as effective for the customer to actually clear customs. So we don't have to deal with that sort of stuff on a national level.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Crafty, I'll cut you off.
Yeah, that's all right. No, my question was more about from a business perspective. So how are you building your business, Josh? Is it word of mouth? Is it testimonies, or are you getting out there and meeting with brewers? You mentioned the community before, so by the sounds of it, you're well into the brewing community. So how do you get your name out there? How do you get Mogwai Labs?
I mean, it's been like essentially I've only been selling yeast for about 18 months.
Right.
And a lot of this is, and because my capacity is quite small at this point in time, due to the size of the lab restrictions, there's only so much yeast that I can sell. So I guess it's in one way it's a positive that I haven't really had to push sort of have a thorough sort of marketing campaign or anything like that. So a lot of it is just word of mouth at the moment, and sort of I've started sort of in the Illawarra hub and sort of just expanded out, sort of primarily to the East Coast now.
So do you end up traveling around the country quite a bit to do these local projects, or?
Not. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that, like starting to get down the South Coast and so there's still quite just a local drive for that at the moment. But I mean, in the future, I'm hoping to sort of do this in a lot of states. I mean, that will be an issue actually, the biosecurity of bringing different plants and swabs and things like that back into New South Wales. So we'll cross that bridge once we get to it.
Is there scope, or is it feasible for people to send you stuff for you to culture from? Obviously, I've been instructed on how to best get it to you in an optimal condition. But if someone's up in northern Queensland, for example, and wants to get a local sample cultured to see what's there, can they just send you a package of a bunch of flowers or some some
special leaves.
special leaves or a bit of dirt or I don't know something
in
or
theory,
other.
I guess they can try. There's always, yeah, they can always try. I mean, like another part of this project as well is like not doing everything for the brewer or the business, but actually like just having conversations and like going like, okay, get the ball started with you, where you go out and forage and try to grow up stuff, at your space, and then like once you're a few steps down the line where that you think that you've got like a nice tasting culture, that's where a sample could potentially be sent back down to us and banked as like a brewer's yeast.
Yeah, right. Okay, so does that, just extrapolating on that side of things, but I think Crafty, because he's in the middle of nowhere,
the Starlink's on the other side of the planet or something right now.
Yeah, Riverborn. He's on Riverborn's on Starlink. So the satellite's probably moved out of the way now, and that's why Crafty's just dropped off.
Just like that, poor.
Yeah, just like that. He's gone. He's gone. Who knows whether he'll come back? But we don't need him anyway.
Yeah.
So now he's disrupted my train of thought now. But is there, to get people on the path to culturing their own yeast or starting that process for you to then take later on to scale, what sort of time and costs, how long is a piece of string question, of course, but what's involved for someone starting that process? Is it just, as you said, sending out your cultures and trying to capture something and then trying to culture it yourself? And then once you think you've got somewhere, then bring it to you?
I mean, I guess like, yeah, I mean, like currently, like for like local projects and stuff, it's all sort of done in like a collaboration space where sort of go out and you're sort of doing stuff together, where it's a bushwalk. I mean, that's what foraging is. Most of the time, it's just a nice walk where you're taking a couple of samples from here and there, right? And then like more of the extensive harder work is like, once you sort of get back to the lab and start growing it and starting to try and make sense of the madness that you've got growing in all your little tubes or whatever it is, and like, I mean, in terms of success rates and stuff, it is like a very low percentage sort of hit and miss. So where you're looking at both flavor potential, but then also like fermentation potential as well. So and then like a mix of both. So you have like strains that they might have a low fermentation potential, but they might be throwing off this beautiful floral aromas, for example. So you're like, oh, okay, that yeast does that. There might be a strain that might be a little bit phenolic, but it might just eat absolutely everything. And you're like, okay, so maybe if we combine those two, and you might have like a nice, fully fermentable beverage. So I mean, it's going down a rabbit hole of different options and possibilities.
And are there yeasts that don't produce ethanol as a byproduct?
Look, there's a lot of like there's strains that so a lot of strains found in nature, they can only metabolize simple sugars like glucose, and they struggle once your sugars get more complex, where it turns into a maltose or a maltose triose. So that's like a real issue that I guess like a complication that brewers have when they're trying to forage for strains and create actual beer with them, is that a lot of wild strains can't handle the complex sugar profile that is present in wort. While if you were to make like a simple cider or something like that, because it is like a more simple sugar composition, you'll have more success.
Right. Okay.
So I guess like in the non-alcoholic space, so like there's a bunch of strains out there that they can only metabolize glucose and nothing else. So that's roughly like 15% of standard wort composition, right? So it'll only ferment 15% of that wort, which will give you a very low alcohol product. And then with other, brewing techniques, you can end up creating a low alcoholic beer with a non-conventional yeast strain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Just on that, talk about yeast. I'd like to talk about bacteria, if we could, because bacteria has negative connotations for a lot of people. And from a brewing perspective, from a distilling perspective, with wild yeasts and bacteria, bacteria is interesting. So, can you elaborate on bacteria and in your opinion, how it works in brewing, or does not work, or can work, and the importance of it for some styles of beer?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a good question, and yeah, it definitely does get because I guess it's considered a major contamination for a majority of breweries and beer styles and whatnot. But it does have a place in wild beer and certain styles. So like Berliner Weiss or like kettle sours, right through to like complex sort of mixed fermentation beers. And that's where sort of the bacteria that's used in brewing primarily is like it'll be acid producing of some sort of variety. So like a lactobacillus or a pediococcus or something like that. And the idea is so that it will hardly sort of like ferment away. While some strains have minor potential to do that, but like it is to inject an acid profile into the beer. So, and it's quite common for breweries to, when they're creating these styles of beer where they want to create like a sour profile, mixed in with fruit or whatever. And then those, depending on how complex you want to go, like throwing in a whole bunch of these acid producing bacterias, will just, like you're producing different acid types that'll create different flavor profiles, and then you're going down that rabbit hole.
God, that between the yeasts and the bacterias, there just seems to be a never-ending potential for different flavors to come out. What's the strangest flavor that you've had that wasn't awful? The strangest flavor that you've had come out of a culture?
I don't know if I can answer that. I've had a lot of awful. I can definitely say that with confidence. Yeah.
Are they often sort of, do they sneak up on you where on the nose it's not too bad, but then you taste it and you just want to throw up? Or
I generally look, if it smells bad, I'm probably not putting it in my mouth, even though there's a reason why you have a nose. You can go down even though stuff can like initially smell bad due to like bacteria and stuff, there is ways that, potentially you can alter that flavor profile with different steps down the line. But at the moment, I'm just, if it smells bad, it's sort of either it'll get frozen down again for another day for me to think about, or it'll just be down into the drain essentially.
Because blue cheese, obviously it's mold, but smells like arse, and yet it can taste quite good.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine there's a similar.
There's definitely
So I imagine you would come across something similar with your yeast profiles as well. How do you get around that? Do you just have to? Sometimes do you think it could be good and you just need to sort of struggle through it, or is that just?
These are just like characterization tests, I guess. So like, it's more about just sort of knowing what that particular strain does, and then if a time ever comes up where an innovative, beverage maker such as yourself be like, I'm looking for this, and I'm like, I've got just the strain for you to play with. Yeah, you never know. Yeah.
So, do you have the ability to make your own Vegemite?
In theory, yes, I guess. Yeah. It's not on the cards, though. I'm not.
Not on the cards?
No.
No thoughts of doing a Mogwai?
Maybe I should.
We've had a couple of questions come through that we should probably get into. William Rule, hi, Will, has chimed in. Do you do anything in somewhat alternative distilling spaces? Is you making vodka using lactose from milk?
I have not. No, but that's that's a wild idea. I like it.
Because there's the in Tassie, there's the vodka made from sheep's whey.
Right. Okay.
Which I don't understand, and I need to read into how it works. But it's a black bottle with sheep's whey vodka or something on it. I'll have to dig it up, and I'll have a little search. While I'm doing that,
I will say though, in terms of lactose, a lot of yeast strains do struggle fermenting that. So, from a base perspective, I'm not sure if that would work for a lot of generic strains.
Right, they struggle with the
not being able to process lactose. So, like, there's a lot of styles of beer.
Lactose intolerant.
Yes, yeah. So there's a lot of beer styles out there where they call it like a milk stout, or they all add lactose to sweeten the beer because the yeast can't process it. Yeah.
All right. And Nick has chimed in saying, "Are you? What excites you more, top or bottom? Fermenting yeast."
It depends on what day you ask me. I sort of chop and change on the top and bottom.
Can you explain the difference between a top and bottom, other than one's fermenting at the top and one's fermenting at the bottom? Why is it doing that?
They're I mean, generally speaking, they're different species of yeast. Is like the basic answer for that one.
Mm-hmm. And what do you find the differences as a category of yeast, top fermenting versus bottom fermenting? What are the generalized characteristic differences of those?
So like top fermenting yeasts, they're sort of known for producing more like, or people explore sort of more elevated flavor profiles. I'll say they prefer warmer temperatures, so they can, in theory, produce like beers quicker. Compared to sort of bottom fermenting strains.
So would a top fermenting be a distiller's yeast, where it can be a bit more forgiving with temperatures and will ferment a bit faster?
I mean, that said, the temperature ranges with, I guess, like bottom and top fermenting yeasts. I mean, their happy spots probably realistically would be around 30 degrees. If you weren't taking flavor profile into consideration. So I mean, the reason lagers are fermented cold at those sort of lower temperatures, it's keeping that flavor profile in check. And then ales, even though it's called warm, is still quite a little bit chilly essentially for ale yeast at that sort of 18, 20 degree mark or whatever it is.
So by keeping it colder, you are slowing down the process.
You're slowing down sort of how quick it's replicating and propagating along, and but you're just keeping those flavor profiles in check, so you've got like a nicer tasting beverage. Particularly more important for if you're trying to create like a neutral flavored product. But I guess that's where moving into your realm of things, where you potentially might want to stress the yeast out, or sort of move into the like warmer temperature profiles where it might be throwing more phenolics or fusel alcohols or things like that. That stuff's going to be elevated at the higher end of the temperature range. And higher than like a typical brewing strain temperature range.
Mm.
Well, that leads in nicely to my question. So, I don't know, 7 years ago, there was a bit of dialogue on Norwegian farmhouse yeast, spike, and others, but there wasn't a lot on the net. And then a few years later, it was everywhere, and brewers were exploring it left, right, and centre. What was the buzz from a brewing perspective around Norwegian farmhouse yeast? I know from a distiller's standpoint, it was they ferment cleaner at higher temperatures. So if you didn't have good temperature control, it was a viable yeast. But from a brewer's perspective, what was the excitement, the buzz around?
Yeah, I mean that being able to ferment at really high temperatures where you can get like for a lot of those strains like clean flavor profiles, with just notes of tropical fruit or orange or things like that. So yeah, like higher temperature, being able to have those fluctuating temperatures and still relatively sort of being in check, where if you did that with your classical strains, it'd be potentially quite awful, right? And then just being able to sort of beat it around the bush, like there was like all these stories coming out of people having finding dried flakes of these yeast types and throwing it in a pot, even though it's been sitting around for a few years, and then the next day it's like halfway through nearly completed fermentation. Like it's magical stuff. It was a good feel good story, I guess, for the brewing world, that all these magical strains from sort of Norway and around those areas would sort of come to be.
Why did it just sort of explode? Did it just someone just figure it out and discover it, or had it been used over there for quite a while and then somehow someone let slip and shared the secret?
Good question. Like I'd have to sort of, I guess, like hit the literature and the blogs and stuff to sort of get the real lowdown on how this sort of came to be. But I mean, these strains were like sort of from different I'll use the word sort of like little townships and areas and stuff were just sort of like kept and sort of passed down around sort of local farmers and other community members. And then I don't know, I'm not too sure how they sort of actually broke into the mainstream, but there was a couple of like key strains, like Voss was a big one. I think that's sort of in a lot of dried format from other major suppliers at the moment. But it was I'm not 100% sure.
But we hear about every now and then there'll be a bottle of wine found at the bottom of the ocean, or a bottle of beer or something from hundreds or thousands of years ago that people are trying to culture a yeast from. Does that work? Are we like how difficult is that to do?
I really hope that it's true, just because I think it's really cool science. I mean, there's got to be. I mean, as long as your processes are right in the way that they're extracting it out, and they're saying what they're getting is real, then yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. But I mean, you can't sort of overlook, potential contamination of, did another strain sort of in the lab or whatever be on the outside of the bottle or whatever. But I hope for most part that those stories are true and real, because it's they're really good.
What's the most exotic thing you've ever sampled?
For beer?
To sample to try and culture a yeast from. What's the most exotic thing you've ever, or weirdest thing someone's ever presented to you and said, here, I want a flavor profile from this?
I have a whole bunch of like friends and stuff through the community. They're always cracking jokes about all sorts of gross things that I can't sort of talk about on the podcast that I should be sampling and stuff. But nothing off the top of my head. Like I'm keeping it pretty boring and PG. I'll say in terms of just different flower and bark samples. Like I try to follow the seasons and find flavors, like I guess like being in the Illawarra, for example. Like doing multiple forage runs on, like known sort of fruits that are found in the area. So Illawarra plum, for example, or like so if I go to a different part of Australia or something, the focus would be on sort of something like that.
Mm. So you have you tried the Polish vagina yeast beer?
I knew you were going to do that.
How could I not?
I have not.
So just reading the little excerpt that I've got on my screen here, Polish-based company makes its Yoni beer, which is brewed from the vaginal lactic acid of underwear models. So it's essentially, they claim that it's essentially the bottled essence of beautiful exotic women.
Oh, I'm going to the basement.
Right, I don't know. I don't even know if you can get that in Australia.
On it from a technical level, do you think that would work?
Yeah. The body's got, we've got a very
yeast
complex.
is everywhere.
Yeah,
it is everywhere. Yeah,
yeast is everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a cream for that. Sorry, I can't help myself. Where those sort of things just.
I'm worried what other things you have up on your computer screen there now.
I have many things up on my computer screen. I have two big screens right here, and I have many things up on them. Not all of them vagina yeast based, though.
So go back to the Illawarra plum. So I've got a question.
That's a euphemism if ever I've heard one.
If you were wrangling, you were sampling, say, now, for example, right? And then you did it, same tree, a year from now, and then a year later, a year from now. From a yeast profile perspective, would you expect there to be a similarity, or just through the nature of variability of sampling year and everything different?
I always expect something different. Like, that's a huge study in itself. Like, you get like similar species, but then again, like sort of as we spoke about earlier, like even though they're the same species, they're going to throw probably completely different flavor profiles. They might have similar fermentation profiles where they might struggle with processing more complex sugars, but their flavor profile could be anywhere from clean to really phenolic or whatever.
So it is really a moment in time when you're taking something and you're developing that strain or cultivating that strain.
Yeah, 100%. Like it is, and I guess that's where like you sort of link that to, I guess like classical, Belgian breweries making wild ales where, like they're only doing that at particular times of year where they're, like they've got all their wort in their cool ships and, they expose it to the elements during the, a particular season, so it is a moment in time sort of collected in a bottle. It's a very romantic sort of way to look at it. But yeah,
fascinating. Never thought of it like that until now.
Yeah, I wonder if that opens up the possibility, or I don't know about viability of looking at sort of event-based beers or event-based fermentations where you've cultured a yeast that was sampled at that moment in time from that particular area where something happened, be it a an annual music festival, taking a sample at the end of that, or what would the yeast at Burning Man be like? That sort of a thing, to like a themed place and time type thing. Would that be possible?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you
Great
as long as
marketing.
as long as you take the notes on when you where and when you took your sample from. Like, I mean, we in regards to the other ingredients, particularly like, I mean, in beer, like that sort of attention to detail is sort of it's coming across in products that are sold, like breweries, like their hop selection process, where they go to the hop farmer and they're actually selecting, particular rows of what hops they want to put in this particular beer, and they reference that. Or for you guys, I'm sure like there's an attention to detail for particular like malts that you're using, and things like that. And I guess yeast is like probably just another I guess like the last sort of frontier in terms of that stuff. I mean, people use water, like they say that it comes from a local water source. So I guess yeast is sort of the last one.
So Nick has chimed in, distilleries form a black fungus on buildings or tin sheds. Can you cultivate the distillery strain wild yeast culture?
I was thinking about this a bit this
barrel?
afternoon, actually. Like, so sort of like in terms of like having like wild yeast, but then also, so I mean, you guys, your space, like you've used like sort of lab grown commercial quantity yeast strains, probably for years and years, and there'd be a whole bunch of that stuff just sort of living in the rafters or whatever. So going out and sort of finding an isolate of that, and probably would have like good fermentation profiles and stuff, will work hard. And then but I mean, like a feral cat, it might just be like the original cat, but just a bit more bigger, meaner and scarier. You're not sure what you'll get. You can play around with that if you just want.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Nick, no, Mick,
No, covered it, Nick. We covered it. Move on.
You'll have to rewind
I
a bit, Mick. I've already let that.
About 1 hour and 2 minutes, somewhere there.
Yeah, I've let that pussy out of the box.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Thanks for that little.
What I was going to say is
nothing like a bit of fish.
Moving on, the distilling community. I think there is two schools of thought. There's distillers that just they believe that distillers yeast is the way to go. It's a workhorse. It knows what it needs to do, and yeast really doesn't have much play on flavor. It's all about the barrels, all about the barley, etc., etc. And then there's others that do believe that yeasts do come across in distillation. The flavors do come across in distillation, and it is another flavor lever to play with. And I would think more and more people they're sort of working through a process. Barrels, getting the barrels under their belt. Barley, getting barley under the belt, and yeast is, as you said, the next frontier. And my own opinion, I think you're going to see more and more people exploring yeast, and what specific flavors can be generated. And then if you take it to the next level, which is you're sampling and you're finding what is your in-house profile. I think that's an exciting future.
Another whole level of terroir, isn't it?
Movable terroir, by the sounds of it too.
Yeah.
Mixed comment.
So, Mick, from a sourdough baker for 25 years, you can definitely get some awesome results with wild yeast. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess a question for you guys. So like once you do your mash and your primary fermentation and stuff, like do you have an idea at that point onwards before before the next steps in your process of flavor profiles that you think the yeast and that will be bringing over to your finished product, or is it something more that you've got to wait more down the line until you've got a better idea. So I guess like in the brewing world, like I mean, ales, it's quite a quick turnaround for your results. You could only be looking at say 3 weeks or something, and then but like if you have a yeast strain, you do it 3 weeks later, you're like, oh, I did that. But like I guess that's where it's like a harder nut to crack, I guess, and like the space for exploring this sort of stuff is you've got to wait a long time for your finished product, right?
Oh, well, you did
right. Take that point in time. If you take it at the fermentation point, and I mean, Crafty, Todd, we've spoken about this at length on the podcast, that to make a good whiskey, you start with making a good beer. So I would imagine the process of selecting the flavor is still going to be the same. Correct me if I'm wrong, Crafty. What the bigger variable is, how will that flavor come across after distillation, if at all?
Okay, I'll comment on Craftworks, and we're doing it a particular way, and others are doing it different ways. So we basically open top ferment. We don't have temperature control. We generally ferment for 7 days.
And we don't really have a lot of control at times.
Right. So we don't have a lot of control, definitely, and that's part of the way we make it, why we make it that way. But it's also we don't have all the expensive equipment. But what I look for is it's a very acidic wash once I finish, and I like that because I'm looking for ester generation as much as possible for those fruity notes. And depending on the yeast I use, and generally I use distiller's yeast, but sometimes in the cooler months I'll switch and co-pitch with Belgium yeast, with distiller's yeast. And what's coming off at the distillation, before it starts to run, you can just smell it. It's pineapples. It's pineapples or mangoes, or it's very, very fruity. But I know distillers that don't open top ferment. Their washes are not acidic, and that's not what they're after. So it really depends on the individuals and what they know and what they're trying to achieve, I guess. But I know a few distillers experimenting with yeast in controlled conditions. So that's the best way I can answer it.
Because the only way to properly experiment is under controlled conditions.
Otherwise, and we are not controlled.
The main difference between fucking around and science is writing it down. That's my understanding of it, anyway.
Having a laboratory and controlled environment, that's beneficial.
That helps. Mick, she said she likes an open top fermentation.
That's so Mick. And on that note,
you're devolving into something.
Yes. So, do we have any questions? We've passed the hour mark, and we don't want to keep Josh too much longer. If there are any other questions from those in the audience, please post them up now, and we will get them, or try to get them answered. Where do you think the yeast? What is the yeast industry in Australia? Are you it?
No. So there's a couple of other. I mean, there's multiple dried yeast suppliers from overseas that are sort of well established here. That you guys are probably using a bunch of their products. And then there's a couple of other Australian liquid yeast manufacturers as well, located in other states. So Mogwai is the only one based in New South Wales.
Yeah, cool. We are very pleased and proud to have you as a sponsor of the program. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to have you on board. And definitely, I think yeast without it, we can't make whiskey. We can't make water. Yeah, that's it. It's sticky water, Absolutely. So yeast, I guess, is the unsung hero. A lot is said about the barrel in distilling. A lot is said about the age and whatnot. But the yeast, without that and without a good base culture, you've got fuck all to call alcohol.
Yeah, well, look, I think I mean, I'm a yeast provider, but at the same time, it's up to, I mean, you guys and you know, other people, beverage makers are, you know, doing all the hard work and sort of driving those flavor profiles to create, you know, finely crafted, you know, beautiful products, you know. So you're, the real yeast whisperers, I'll say.
So one last question from myself is, what do you want to see happen in the yeast space in Australia? What would you like to see brewers and distillers doing and asking you for?
Look, I think, like, I mean, just the Australian craft beverage sector it's an extremely, as I said earlier, it's just a very exciting place to be, and just, you know, creativity, innovations everywhere, and just I mean, as you mentioned just before, like you're seeing, like, you know, more and more distillers starting to explore the, you know, the yeast space, you know, slowly but surely, and, you know, sort of innovating in those ways. So I think, like, there's what we're seeing is just the right trend, I think, and just being a part of it's perfect.
Awesome. Nick has posted a question. Do you play with koji and yeast for sake or rice ferment?
Not at this stage, but it's on the, you know, the to-do list at some point in the future. But yeah, definitely want to play around with, you know, like more food fermentations and sort of delve into that sort of stuff. Yeah, once I'm a little bit more established.
Cool. Nick is actually making a rice whiskey, and I do need to hit him up to find out how far along that is. Last time we tasted it, it was pretty damn good. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Sure, in bottling stage at the moment.
He's in bottling.
I'm pretty sure he's in bottling now. Nick can make a comment, hopefully, about
Sample.
He's bottling first releases, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other final questions or no? Otherwise,
hold your peace.
Shall I throw Todd under the bus, or are we too late for that?
But it might not work.
Or roll the credits.
Or we'll roll the credit. All right, roll the credits. Thank you all. Please like and subscribe. I've rebuilt the website from the ground up, and I think it's looking pretty schmick. So please do jump on and have a look. Like us on Facebook and all the rest of it, and feel free to leave a review on YouTube or Apple Music or Spotify or wherever you are listening. Thank you again. Please visit mogwailabs.com.au. Where did Mogwai come from?
Do you want the professional answer or just the
No,
correct
I
answer?
like to think that
When I googled it earlier, all I got was I got a gremlin.
Yeah, we're associating yeast with gremlins, and that it's a marriage of that. That's the nerd in me. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, look, it's so I guess, like, it comes from that concept where, you know, like a gremlin or a mogwai turns into a gremlin, so transition and change. So from a yeast perspective, it's like from creating, you know, creating a final fermented beverage product. But the name itself, so it was kind of an easy one for me to label the business. So it was a nickname for me, given to me back in university, where if I had a couple too many drinks after midnight, I would transform things. But then I sort of applied that to sound a little bit more professional, which I think works for the business.
Love it. Thank you.
That's
On
good.
that note, thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you, Todd. Are we on next week?
No, we get a breather next week, and then I need to check up who we've got the week after.
Right. Actually, that's quite convenient because I fly to Tassie that day. So, we'll be back in maybe 2 weeks, which will be roughly.
So for all of the punters out there, we are slowly moving back into once a fortnight broadcasting, as opposed to trying to keep up the weekly, because it's a bit tiring for some of us at times.
I don't know what you complain about.
We love it. We love it, but
we do love
often it can be difficult for people to commit all the time.
Yeah.
Not us, but them, other people.
Yeah. Other people.
So we will be back. Stay tuned to Facebook, and we'll post up when the next one is. Thank you all. Thank you, Josh. Greatly appreciate it. And again, thank you for being an awesome sponsor. Credits time. Ciao.